Welcome to AgroScience Eye Podcast. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of rice genetics.
Yeah, it's a really exciting field, especially with this new research that just came out.
Definitely. And we're going to break it all down for our listeners. So to kick things off,
Yeah.
what's got you so excited about this particular study?
Well, for one, the sheer scale of it is impressive. Scientists have developed this incredible resource called the 18K rice population.
18K. That sounds massive.
It is. It's a collection of over 18,000 different rice lines.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking about a lot of rice, but what makes this collection so special?
Think of it this way. Imagine having 18,000 slightly different recipes for rice, each one with subtle variations that impact the final dish. Maybe one's a little stickier, one's more fragrant, one's got a different texture.
I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
Right. So that's essentially what the 18K rice population is. It's like a giant experiment for understanding the genetic recipe of rice.
And would it be safe to say that by having so many variations, it gives us a much more comprehensive view of rice diversity?
Absolutely. And that's key because the 16 parent varieties used to create this collection, they come from all the major evolutionary branches of rice aimed at diverse geographic locations.
So it's like having a global rice buffet with every flavor and texture imaginable.
Exactly. And this diversity is key to unlocking the genetic secrets behind important rice traits. Things like yield, plant, height, disease, resistance.
Oh, that makes sense. So we've got this massive collection of rice, and from what I understand, scientists went a step further and mapped the genomes of a good portion of these varieties.
That's right. They used cutting-edge sequencing technology to create these really detailed blueprints of the genomes of 15 of the 16 parent varieties.
So we're talking about a molecular level blueprint for each of these rice varieties. That's impressive.
It is. And what they found was even more remarkable. Even within those 16 parent varieties, there's this incredible amount of genetic variation.
Now, when you say genetic variation, what do you mean exactly?
I'm talking about tiny differences in their DNA. These differences can lead to big differences in the plant's traits.
Oh, okay. So even within a relatively small group of rice plants, there's a lot of genetic diversity at play.
A lot. And that's where this research gets really interesting, because now we have this massive collection of rice with detailed genetic blueprints for each variety. And that opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding and improving this crucial crop.
Right. So how do scientists actually go about connecting specific genes to specific traits? I mean, it's not like they could just look at a strand of DNA and say, oh, this one makes the rice grow taller.
Haha, no, it's definitely more complicated than that. This is where something called genome-wide association studies, or GWAs, comes in.
GWS.
Mm.
Sounds a bit like a high-tech detective agency for genes.
Sort of. Think of it like a giant treasure hunt where scientists scan the entire genome for tiny variations that are linked to specific traits.
Okay, I think I'm following.
So they're looking for patterns in the DNA that correspond to differences in how the rice plants look or behave. Exactly. And this study identified a ton of these links. It pinpointed 12,207 QTLs, which stands for quantitative trait loci. These are regions of the genome associated with those 16 key agronomic traits we talked about.
Now, I have to admit, I've heard about genome-wide association studies before. What's really surprising is that this study found so many new genes that we didn't even know were associated with rice traits.
Right. 72% of the QTLs they identified contain genes that were previously unknown. It's like uncovering this treasure trove of genetic information that we never knew existed.
That's huge. It really highlights just how much we still have to learn about the genetics of this vital crop.
Absolutely. And it also gives us so many new avenues for improving rice. Now, to make sense of all this data, the researchers developed a new computational method called Rice G2G, which stands for Rice GWS to Gene.
Rice G2G. Now that sounds delicious, like a new rice-based energy drink.
Maybe we should trademark that. But seriously, Rice G2G is this powerful tool for prioritizing the most promising candidate genes for further study. It takes all that GWA's data, combines it with other genetic info, and helps researchers zero in on the genes that are most likely to be involved in specific traits.
So it's like having a detective sifting through clues to identify the prime suspect in a case.
Exactly. And Rice G2G was remarkably successful. It not only confirmed the role of many known rice genes, but it also led to the discovery of a whole bunch of new ones.
That's amazing. So they found these genes that are potentially responsible for certain traits, but did they actually test any of them to see if they really had that impact?
They did. The researchers conducted experiments to validate two newly identified genes, OSMAS22 and OSFTL1.
Okay, I'm going to need a little help with those names. What do those genes actually do?
Sure. So both of these genes are involved in controlling when the rice plant flowers. This is called heading date. And they also found that OSMAN22 affects panicle number. That's the number of branches on the rice plant that hold the grains.
Gotcha. So these genes could potentially help us control when a rice plant flowers and how many grains it produces.
That's the idea. And it shows just how much potential this research has for developing new rice varieties with improved traits. But, something we have to remember is that genes don't operate in isolation.
Know what you mean?
I mean, they interact with each other in these complex ways, which can have a huge impact on how traits actually show up.
So it's not just about finding one gene that controls one trait. There's a whole network of interactions going on.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting things about this study is that it highlighted the prevalence of something called epistasis.
Epistasis. Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Sure. Basically, epistasis is when genes interact with each other, and that interaction can either mask or enhance the effects of each other.
So it's like those genes are in a constant conversation negotiating which traits will ultimately be expressed.
That's a great way to put it. And the researchers actually found over 1,000 examples of this epistasis in the 18K rice population.
Wow, 1,000. It really is like a genetic party in there. Can you give me a concrete example of how this epistasis thing works in rice?
Absolutely. Take the GHD8 gene, for example. It's involved in protein content in rice. But guess what? They found that its effect can be completely masked by another gene called AHD1.
Hold on, so you're saying one gene can basically silence another gene?
In a way, yes. And it all depends on the specific combination of genes present in that particular rice variety.
So it's like adding a special ingredient to your rice recipe, but then another ingredient prevents it from doing its thing.
That's a fantastic analogy. It really drives home the point that you can't just focus on one gene in isolation. You have to consider the whole genetic network and how all those pieces work together. It's complex, but it's also incredibly fascinating.
I'm starting to see why you're so excited about this research. It's really shifting our understanding of how genes work and how we can use that knowledge to improve crops.
Exactly. And it's not just about rice. What we learn here can be applied to other crops as well, potentially leading to improvements in wheat, corn, soybeans, you name it.
Wow, so it's like rice is becoming this model organism for understanding the genetics of all sorts of plants.
Exactly. And that's a really exciting prospect because by unlocking the secrets of rice genetics, we're opening up a whole new world of possibilities for creating a more sustainable and resilient food system for everyone.
I completely agree. But you know what? This is a lot to take in. We've covered so much ground already, and there's still so much more to explore.
I know, right? We've just scratched the surface of this amazing research. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to delve deeper into the world of rice genetics. Stay tuned.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about epistasis, this idea that genes can interact with each other and influence how traits are expressed.
Right. And it turns out there are some genes that are particularly influential in this whole network. They're like the VIPs of the rice genome.
VIP genes, huh? I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, they're called hub genes, and they have this amazing ability to interact with a whole bunch of other genes.
So it's not just one-on-one interactions. These hub genes are like social butterflies.
Exactly. And because they interact with so many other genes, they end up influencing multiple traits. It's like they're the master conductors of the rice orchestra, coordinating everything.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So these hub genes are kind of like the puppet masters pulling the strings behind the scenes.
I like that. And the researchers were actually able to pinpoint some of these hub genes by looking at all those epistatic interactions they discovered. Remember how we talked about some genes popping up again and again?
Yeah, like they were the popular kids at the genetic party.
Right. So by analyzing those patterns, they were able to identify some of the key players in the rice genome.
That's really clever. So tell me, who are some of these rice influencers? And what kind of power do they have?
Well, one of the most influential hub genes they found was GHD8.
GHD8? Another one for the pronunciation guide?
You got it. But the name's not important. What's important is what this gene does. It's involved in a whopping 10 different traits.
10?
Yeah.
Seriously. It's a lot of multitasking for one gene.
It is. We're talking things like when the plant flowers, how tall it grows, how much grain it produces, even the protein content of the grain.
Yeah, GHD8 is like the overachiever of the rice genome. So if you wanted to make a big impact on how a rice plant grows and develops, targeting this gene would be the way to go.
It could be. But we have to be careful, remember, those hub genes are interacting with a lot of other genes, so messing with one could have unintended consequences elsewhere.
Right, like a domino effect. You tweak one thing and it could ripple through the entire network.
Exactly. So
Oh,
it's really important to proceed with caution and really understand the potential impact before making any drastic changes.
makes sense. So GHD8 is a big player.
Hmm.
Were there any other hub genes that stood out in this research?
Oh, yeah. SD1 is another big one. This gene's been on scientists' radar for a while because it plays a key role in controlling plant height.
Ah, plant height. That's a big one, right? I mean, it affects how much sunlight the plant can capture, how well it competes with weeds, all sorts of things.
Exactly. And this study found that SD1 is involved in 9 different traits and over 60 epistatic interactions.
Wow, it's like the social media influencer of the rice world.
Hmm.
So by understanding these hub genes, breeders can potentially fine-tune the architecture of the rice plant to optimize its performance.
Right. That's the idea. It's all about identifying those key control points in the genome and figuring out how to adjust them to create rice varieties that are better suited to different environments and needs.
This is all so fascinating. But I have to admit, my head's spinning a little bit with all these genes and interactions. Can you remind me why this research is so important? What's the big takeaway for someone who just wants to enjoy a delicious bowl of rice?
That's a great question. At the end of the day, this research is giving us the tools to create a more resilient, sustainable, and nutritious food system.
Okay, that's a goal I can get behind. But I'm curious, how do these scientific discoveries actually translate into real-world benefits for the people who grow and eat rice every day? We're not going to be genetically engineering every rice plant out there, are we?
No, not exactly. But remember those 96 promising candidate genes we talked about earlier? Well, those are like gold for breeders. They can use those genes as targets to develop new rice varieties with improved traits.
And how do they actually do that? I mean, do they have to go through each plant and examine its genes individually?
There's a technique called marker-assisted selection. It uses DNA analysis to identify and select plants with those desirable traits.
Ah, so instead of waiting for the plants to grow and then seeing what traits they have, breeders can now just do a DNA test.
You got it. It's like a cheat sheet for breeders. It helps them speed up the process and develop new varieties much faster.
That sounds incredibly efficient. So are there any real-world examples of this in action? Like, have we already seen new rice varieties developed using these advanced techniques?
Absolutely. One really cool example is the development of rice that can actually survive being underwater.
Hold on, rice that can grow underwater. Is that even possible?
It is. It's called submergence-tolerant rice, and it's already making a huge difference in flood-prone regions. Scientists found a gene called sub1A that allows rice to survive being completely submerged for weeks at a time.
Wow, that's like giving rice the ability to hold its breath underwater. That's incredible. What other superpowers are we giving rice these days?
Well, scientists are also working on developing drought-tolerant rice, salt-tolerant rice, even rice that's resistant to specific pests and diseases.
So it's like we're creating a whole league of rice superheroes, each with their own unique ability to combat the challenges that farmers and consumers are facing.
I like that analogy. And it's not just about resilience either. Remember all those efforts to boost the nutritional content of rice? That's also benefiting from this research.
Right, we were talking about rice 2.0. Rice that's not just high yielding and resilient, but also packed with nutrients.
Exactly. By understanding the genes involved in nutrient uptake and how they interact with the environment, we can develop rice varieties that are true nutritional powerhouses.
So we could potentially create rice that's fortified with vitamins, minerals, and other essential nutrients, targeting specific dietary needs and deficiencies. It's like we're turning rice into a personalized nutrition delivery system.
That's the exciting potential. And we're already seeing some amazing results. One example is golden rice, which has been genetically modified to produce beta-carotene, a precursor to vitamin A.
Now, I've heard of golden rice. It's been a bit controversial, hasn't it?
It has, mainly because it's a genetically modified organism, or GMO. But it's important to remember that all crops have been genetically modified in some way throughout history, whether it's through selective breeding or more modern techniques like genetic engineering. The key is to ensure that these modifications are done safely and responsibly.
Right, so it's not about being for or against GMOs. It's about approaching these new technologies with a balanced perspective and weighing the potential benefits and risks carefully.
Exactly. And golden rice has the potential to address vitamin A deficiency, which is a serious public health problem in many parts of the world.
That's right. Vitamin A deficiency can lead to blindness and other health problems. So even though there's controversy, golden rice could be a really important tool for improving public health.
It definitely could be. And golden rice is just the tip of the iceberg. Scientists are also working on biofortifying rice with iron, zinc, and other essential nutrients.
It's amazing to think that we could be on the verge of creating rice that's not just a staple food, but a superfood.
I know, it's really exciting. But with all this focus on agronomic traits and nutrition, there's another area where this research is really taking off.
Oh, what's that?
The study of how genes interact with the environment. We've touched on it already, but there's this whole field called epigenetics that's really starting to blow people's minds.
Epigenetics. Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for me.
Think of it like this. Even if we have the entire DNA sequence of a rice plant, we still can't perfectly predict how it's going to behave in a particular environment. That's because environmental factors can actually influence how genes are expressed without changing the underlying DNA sequence.
Wait, are you saying the environment can actually change how genes work without altering the genetic code itself?
Exactly. And that's what epigenetics is all about. It's like having a volume knob on a gene. The environment can turn it up or down, fine-tuning its activity without changing the code itself.
So it's not just the genes themselves, it's how those genes interact with the environment to produce the final traits we see.
You got it. And this adds a whole new layer of complexity to the puzzle of rice genetics. But it also makes it that much more fascinating.
This is all so mind-blowing. The more we learn about rice genetics, the more we realize how much we still don't know. It's humbling, but also incredibly inspiring.
I agree. It's like opening up this Pandora's box of genetic wonders.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get more exciting from here.
Well, expert, thank you so much for taking us on this incredible journey into the world of rice genetics. It's been an eye-opening experience.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the next time you enjoy a bowl of rice, take a moment to appreciate the incredible complexity and potential hidden within those tiny grains.
So it's like we're trying to understand this whole intricate dance between genes and the environment, and we're only just beginning to learn the steps.
Yeah, it's a complex but beautiful dance. And as we unravel those complexities, we're not only learning more about rice, we're gaining insights into the fundamental principles of life itself.
It's incredible to think that something as seemingly simple as a grain of rice can hold so many secrets.
I know, right? And the best part is that this research isn't just some abstract intellectual pursuit. It has the potential to make a real difference in the world.
Absolutely. I mean, rice is a staple food for billions of people. So any improvements we can make to its yield, its resilience, its nutritional content, that has huge implications for global food security and human health.
Exactly. And I think that's what drives so many scientists in this field. It's that desire to use their knowledge to solve real-world problems and make a positive impact.
That's truly inspiring. Well, expert, this has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive into the world of rice genetics. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and passion with us today. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm honestly excited to see what the future holds for this incredible crop.
It's been my pleasure. And I hope our listeners feel the same way, because the next time they enjoy a bowl of rice, they can appreciate not just the taste, but the incredible scientific journey that went into creating that tiny grain. And who knows, maybe someday soon we'll all be enjoying rice varieties that are even more nutritious, more resilient, and more delicious, thanks to the amazing work being done by rice geneticists around the world.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into rice genetics. Thanks for listening, everyone.